For those of you that don't know, the House of Lords is the upper chamber of the UK Parliament. So we have a bicameral Parliament, which means that you have two chambers within it, quote unquote chambers, and you have sort of two bodies within it that have to pass laws back and forth between them before they become law. The US also has a bicameral Parliament in that it has the Houses of Congress and it has the Senate, and those two bodies are elected slightly differently to represent the country in slightly different ways. So the way in which it works is the House of Commons is elected. There are 650 constituencies over the UK which are broadly meant to have roughly the same amount of people in them. There will be less in the near future, we are led to believe. So our lower house is elected. Each one of these splodges between the white lines here has a member of parliament who sits in the House of Commons. So our upper house is the House of Lords, and that is appointed. The theory is that you appoint someone to the House of Lords because they have experience or skills or expertise that is going to be useful in terms of policy making, right? And again, I am not a supporter of the House of Lords. I don't think it should exist. However, the theory behind it is that when you are making laws, then as well as having all of these people that are voted in the House of Commons, you might also want people who are experts to be able to weigh in on that process. So in a pandemic, for example, you might like to have doctors and nurses and public health researchers who have been appointed to the House of Lords, who are therefore able to guide that legislation and shape that legislation. A lot of people are in there because they are people who have done well in business, and that obviously affects laws in terms of us getting business-friendly legislation, often not consumer-friendly or worker-friendly. But you can see the theory. And every time there is someone who is appointed to the House of Lords that people don't think should be appointed to the House of Lords, there is often like a bit of discussion about, oh, this brings the House of Lords down a peg or whatever, or it disgraces the House of Lords. However, in reality, the continued existence of like half of the Parliament being just people who get appointed for being friends or donors to prime ministers and politicians is kind of itself the problem. And someone was saying earlier, like, will Keir Starmer abolish the House of Lords when he becomes prime minister? Keir Starmer in the past has talked about the idea of a House of Regions and Nations. So having the Houses of Parliament stay broadly the same and having 650 MPs who are elected for a certain area. So you have one for each town or city or region or whatever. And then also having people that are elected so across the southwest of England or the southeast, etc. You could do like a proportional system. So as well as having representation based on different areas, because obviously you then get into a position where either through gerrymandering or just through the places in which people happen to live, you do end up with a situation in which if you have the wrong number of Labour or Tory voters in the wrong places, you end up with a massively Conservative or massively Labour government. Whereas if you added up all of the second place votes, the difference might not be that great. And so you could have a system wherein you had some people elected for different areas, but then you either had a proportional list system across the whole country or for different areas. Both Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have assemblies. So there are certain decisions that the UK government doesn't make, but which are instead devolved to the Scottish Parliament or to the Welsh Parliament to make for those areas. And this does lead to a kind of weird system in which, because certain things are devolved to those parliaments, you end up with this scenario where English MPs can't vote on certain policies that would affect people living in Wales or people living in Scotland. However, because there's not an equivalent body for England, the Houses of Parliament, and so all MPs, get to vote on decisions that affect England, which means that Scottish MPs and Welsh MPs get to vote very directly on decisions that will affect people who live in England, which is like a weird system, which we've never quite managed to work out the reality of. There has been proposals for an English assembly before. Some people have argued for that. It's a little bit of a fudge. If and when the Labour Party win the next election, the House of Lords is both an ideological problem for them because, at least in theory, members of the Labour Party should oppose the existence of an anti-democratic house which is called the House of Lords and which benefits the people in power by virtue of being appointed by people in power. But they also should oppose it in more practical terms, because even with a majority in the House of Commons, the Labour Party is only going to have 174 Lords in the House of Lords compared to 261 Conservative peers. However, what has tended to happen in the past is that the Labour Party has often made big promises in terms of reforming the House of Lords. There's a famous poster from as far back as 1910 in which Labour is clearing the way to the House of Lords to presumably, reform it, get rid of it. It's much like electoral reform in terms of the fact that whenever the Labour Party do get into power, they suddenly go, oh, well, we're in power now, and maybe we can use this system to our benefit, and then they keep it, and it works to their benefit for maybe as much as a decade before it goes back to working against them. I don't know what the current polling is in terms of how many. I've not looked at it in a little while. So predicted seats currently 120, 559. Like that is a big majority. And it will be really fascinating to see what does Keir Starmer do with that majority, because that's essentially you can do what you like. My feeling is that they will still be incredibly cautious because people are voting against the Conservatives rather than for Labour at the moment.